Last time we saw each other at APEC in San Francisco, a few months from now. So in retrospect, are things getting better? Of course, it depends on the interpretation of better, but tell me about your takeaway.
Our takeaway from our PwC survey is they are better. And what I mean by that is the CEO community is a lot more optimistic compared to where they were last time and a lot less pessimistic. Now that's views on the global economy. I think we have to differentiate their confidence level on a global economy versus their confidence level of their ability to raise revenues in the next 12 months. Because the reality is we see actually less confidence in the CEO's ability to raise revenues. And that goes back to what we see. We see a more stable, nonetheless fragile economy compared to where we were a year ago. But we see a slowing economy compared to where we were a year ago. And as a result, it's tougher to raise revenues. Typically, you'll raise prices, you'll increase the amount of consumption, you'll get more revenue from that. Not so easy these days. And as a result, CEOs have to rethink their revenue expectations and the effectiveness and efficiencies of their organizations for the bottom line.
What about some advice from you, your research, in terms of this so-called rethink?
It's clear that when you look at the next 10 years, we have a number of external factors, AI, climate, regulatory, whatever it may be. And CEOs are struggled with and are troubled by the amount of change that's coming their way. Can they keep up is the question they're asking. And unfortunately, 45% of the CEOs we surveyed around the world would say, I cannot stay in business with the economic model I have unless I radically change in reaction to those forces that I talked about earlier. Now, it's interesting there because there's 55% that intuitively then don't need to change. Right. Which the reality is they do, they may just not know it yet. But even within the 45%, there's a need for organizations to drive change faster and in scale to take advantage of the opportunities. And the ones that do that well are actually going to be leading the development and leading the sustainability efforts that we have around the world.
So do you see those with some common personalities or common ground, while those are trying to seek a change? Which direction of change are they looking at, really?
First, you have to have a relentless focus on what the consumer really needs and wants. It's changing all the time, both in terms of what goods and services they want, how they will purchase them, and how they will consume them. And to understand all three is extremely important as you enhance the loyalty, because it costs money to attract new consumers. You don't want to lose any. The second thing is the disruption risk that comes from digital artificial intelligence and generative AI. And that's fast approaching. We see radical change in the last 12 months, and CEOs believe it's going to impact significantly the way they create, capture, and realize the value of their business model today. So that's a second piece.
How are they looking at the so-called ideological competitions that we have seen over the past few years? Are they getting more mature about that?
Very much so. You see more resiliency in their organizations, a better understanding of the world in which we live, and as a result, a better resiliency level and mindset to say, we have to acknowledge these differences in the world. Let's figure out a way to navigate those differences rather than work for one single answer.
Trade war, as we know, that played a key role a few years ago. What about now for CEOs?
Trade concerns still continue. The reality is it's lessened from what I'll call the catastrophic concerns that were had a couple of years ago. The concept of globalization, people say is dead. I'm going to argue it's not dead. It's just got to be rewired. So you're seeing more bilateral, trilateral, regional deals that are going to be done. But the world is still smaller. There is more dependency on one another, no matter where we may be. And we can't solve for these problems without it. So it's lessened, but it's got to be rewired both in the actions of what you do and the mindset which you bring to it.
Also, technology competition and sometimes even can be described as rivalry. You see that as an example, the so-called chip war. So how do you see that is going to play a role and how CEOs globally reacting to that reality?
CEOs today most of them have come to the realization there's different rules and regulations in various parts of the world. There's different trade requirements and regulations in different parts of the world. I've got to comply with all of them if I want to be a global business or a multi.
But can they?
The answer is yes, they have to. They have no choice if you want to be doing business in these countries. But that means is you're going to have to spend more money more effectively. And the organizations that actually, I'm going to argue, use data effectively and efficiently, maybe leveraging technology differently, will do that faster, better, cheaper than anybody else. If you do it, that's a competitive advantage. So these global organizations that use AI, for example, to manage for compliance, is an upside potential, not a downside risk. And differentiation is the name of the game relevant to the work that you have to do.
But as you know, all the technologies are also being governed in very different styles of governments. And there are different rules as well.
This is where CIOs and the CEOs and COOs are coming to the realization, I've got to actually have a fragmented picture that comes together with a lot of puzzle pieces, not a one-size-fits-all. Because the one-size-fits-all will not work.
Right.
It will not be effective and efficient either, because I've got so many workarounds that deal with local requirements. So this regulatory regime and overlay, important, but those that manage it best will be the ones that have differentiating upside potential.
2024 is a very interesting year, and that is an understatement as we know it. Elections taking place all over the world, and meanwhile, we also see the economies are trying to figure out the way forward. So how do you see the mentality that you just described vis-a-vis all these, what we know gonna happen?
It's clear that the CEOs today are doing a better job of defining what's controllable. What can they own, control, take action on, and get results from. And there's a realization of there's so much out there that's uncontrollable or unknown. And in that case, we shouldn't spend a lot of time talking about the what ifs. We should be talking about, if this happens, what will you do about it? So scenario planning becomes extremely important, and optionality becomes extremely important in the eyes, I'm going to argue, of CEOs, but also in the eyes of governments as they think about the relative role that they play. So speed and scale is an important theme. Agility and scenario planning and optionality is another really important theme for CEOs to drive through their organizations.
Last question, China, of course. This is a country in transformation that's been going on for some time. Now we see the country trying to seek what they call high quality development. So behind this rather abstract phrase, what do you see as the logic? How is this logic working together with what you just described about the mentalities and realities of global CEOs?
China was, from the group of CEOs, the most concerned about the reinvention over the next 10 years than any other place in the world. Now, let's also put that into context. China has gone through the biggest change, and as a result, their CEOs are much more attuned to the need for change. So it's not like we're resting on complacency. And that's a good thing because they recognize it and taking action compared to those that don't even recognize the need for change. So a lot of people worry about the downside risk. I actually take the other side of the equation, which is they're acknowledging it and doing something about it. Second thing, as you think about China, the combination of the infrastructure that's been created. When you look at the skill sets that the citizens have, the amount of technology that's in place already, the education system that's there that fosters innovation, these are key elements for future growth and innovation and entrepreneurship. And as we know from China, the ability to scale that is actually achievable. And when you scale that in China, it's fantastic. So that's another upside potential here in terms of the secret ingredients for what I'll call sustained economic growth. And as you look at some of the other pictures, it's really important to focus on the continuation and rise of the lower middle class, particularly in the central and western parts of China. Second is China's continued role in the global economy, supply chain and otherwise. And third, how does the China citizen continue to consume in a quality way rather than an excess way? And that's where President Xi's focus on quality growth is super important for the world to understand that there'll be a sustainability to it, not a lot of volatility to it.
And now you see in China just some few anecdotes, stories about local tourism. In Heilongjiang province, you know, the ice sculpture festivals. And you also see in Shanghai, one TV series ignited the enthusiasm to seek what Shanghai was like in the 1990s. Right. So all these are anecdotal stories going on in China. What are they showing about the so-called new consumption, new energy, new development? So how do you see these new anecdotes are actually reflecting parts of China?
So when you look at these anecdotes, you see a great local interest to understand history, but also make sure we're focused on the future. Likewise, from an outside of China perspective, a better understanding of the history of China and the reason it exists and how it exists, so you know how to operate within it. So a lot more understanding, whereas candidly the last decade or two, while China's been changing, people around the world had to be educated of China, what the consumers want, what the citizens want.
Right.
So there's actually a convergence point at the local level and a convergence point more so at the global level right now, which actually creates that opportunity for consumption locally, growth locally, consumption globally enabled by what China can do at the global level and enabling the global growth.
Right. There were old saying like digging all the way to China, right? Or finish the food on your plate. There are children in China that are hungry.
Right.
Of course, those were stereotypes of China decades ago, even though that is also a stereotype. But now you see new stereotypes being developed. What is the best way to be able to break all those stereotypes, both for China and for China about others?
The number one area that people have to focus on is how do you enable trust? Trust amongst governments, trust amongst citizens, trust among businesses. How do you enable trust? You engage more. You don't talk to or talk about. You engage on a bilateral basis. Number two, you make commitments and you deliver on those commitments. Therefore, I trust the next commitment you're going to make as a higher degree of confidence you'll actually get it done. And third, there's accountability. You get it done, and if you don't get it done, there's repercussions for not getting things done.
Right.
So making sure that you learn and could progress that journey with the results and the accountability and the reporting to enable that trust, equally as important. So those three things, I think, are the secret ingredients to how do we deal with the stereotypes and the assumptions and get the trust back in the system that we need that's so beneficial to the world.